I carried a load for 10 years, an unbearable weight that injured my back and drained me daily. I pushed beyond my limits to repay a debt I hadn't created, a burden placed on me the moment I said, I do. It loomed over my marriage like a threatening cloud. Foolishly, I convinced myself that clearing the skies was my responsibility. I took on extra work, accepted more projects, and sacrificed my time because I wanted to accomplish it. For my wife, for our future, for the family that had welcomed me. Every dime I made went toward it. I skipped outings with friends, turned down vacations, and poured my bonuses into paying off a debt that wasn't mine. And finally, after 10 years, the impossible was done. That night, as I sat at the dining table, I had fully paid off my father-in-law's house. The air was thick with the scent of well-seasoned beef. The steady buzz of conversation made the space feel warm, like home. Glasses clinked, laughter floated through the air like a cozy embrace. My wife's quiet, familiar chuckle rang out as she spoke to her father. I waited, expecting her to reach for my hand, to acknowledge what I had done. Perhaps a fleeting glance, a knowing smile. But she was entirely focused on her father, smiling easily, naturally. Then, just as I opened my mouth to speak, she did something I had never seen before. She laughed, a carefree, light-hearted sound, and in a voice so casual, so offhand, she said, "Saw this coming. Your wife's new husband will take over now." For a second, I thought I had misheard. The words were too effortless, too flippant, slicing through the air like a dagger. My fingers tightened around my fork as my mind scrambled to piece them together. I looked at her, waiting for some kind of explanation, a joke, a correction, anything. But nothing came. She only laughed again. Across the table, her father nodded in agreement, as if I had merely been a placeholder. As if my time had run out. As if I had fulfilled my purpose. I felt their eyes on me, watching, waiting for a reaction, shock, rage, betrayal. Anything to confirm that they had fooled me. But they had no idea who I was. I forced my expression to remain unchanged. I wanted to demand an explanation, to push back my chair and walk away. But that's what they wanted, an emotional outburst, a moment of weakness. Instead, I calmly placed my fork down, leaned back, and studied them. She was still smiling, thinking she had won. I turned to my father-in-law, the man who had taken my money year after year, watched me struggle, watched me sacrifice, and never once offered to help. I had been silent for too long. And in that silence, unease seeped into the room. My wife shifted slightly. Finally, she looked at me. A slow smile crept onto my face, but not the smile of a broken man, not the smile of someone discarded. No, it was something else. Something they had never seen before. I nodded, my decision made in that precise moment. I picked up my napkin, wiped the corners of my mouth, and straightened my cuffs. "Excuse me." My voice was quiet, calm. I pushed my chair back and stood. No questions, no arguments, no words wasted. As I walked away, one thought rooted itself in my mind. They believed they had defeated me. They had no idea what was about to happen. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my study, surrounded by 10 years' worth of financial records, bank statements, mortgage agreements, legal documents. A story of patience. A story of sacrifice. And now a story of consequences. By morning, everything had changed. At 7 a.m., I walked into my lawyer's office. He was groggy, rubbing his temple. "This better be good," he muttered. "It's better than good," I said. "It's game-changing." By 8 a.m., I was at the bank. The branch manager greeted me with a familiar smile. "What can we do for you today?" I placed a folder on the counter. "I need to make some changes to a few accounts." "It's urgent." He glanced at the documents. His smile faded. "I'll get started on this immediately." By 10 a.m., my phone was filled with missed calls. By 11 a.m., my wife and her father were panicking. By 11:30 a.m., I was at the mortgage office, standing before the property manager. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents. "Sir, this house is in your name." I nodded. "That's right." He hesitated. "Would you like to schedule an eviction?" I smiled. "It's already overdue." By noon, their world crumbled. And by the time they realized what had happened, it was far, far too late. "I wanted to let you know, the loan agreements have been examined in response to your request. Your father-in-law's business documents still designate you as the principal co-signer. So you retain the freedom to call in the debts or restructure them as you see fit." I grinned. I heard it, the slight hesitation when I gave the order. "Proceed with the freezes on all accounts." My voice was smooth, effective. There was no doubt in my command. The manager cleared his throat before acknowledging. Sir, the limitations will be implemented in the coming hours. Excellent. Please give me the confirmation. I hung up and let out a slow exhale. This was only the beginning. My father-in-law's company, his pride, his so-called legacy, was barely being held together by financial duct tape. My credit lines had been the only thing keeping it afloat. At 3:45 p.m., I interrupted him. At 4 p.m., my lawyer sent me a frantic message, he knew. By 4:05 p.m., I smirked for the second time that day. My father-in-law barged into my office, but this time there was no haughtiness, no arrogance. Instead, his expression was condescending yet desperate. He slammed a folder onto my desk. I picked it up and idly perused the balance sheets, past due loan notices, and other documents. I already knew every detail before he walked in, but I still stated, I'm not playing a game. I laid the papers aside, letting him speak. His expression twisted in exasperation. I'm just taking back what's mine, he hissed. I used my money to build that business. I leaned back. And I'm done paying for your mistakes. Damn it, he swore, pacing the room, running his fingers through his graying hair. His breaths were uneven. You don't know how business operates. You take the money, and everything falls apart. His hands clenched tightly, his chest heaving. You want retribution? Fine. Take the house, take the money, but don't destroy my business in the process. I tilted my head. This isn't about revenge. It's about justice. His voice broke. You think you're punishing me? You're hurting your wife too. I stared at him. He knew I owed her nothing. He was right. Then what do you want? I tapped my fingers against the desk. I want you out. His forehead furrowed. Out of what? Everything. Your company, your influence, your contacts. I want your name removed. Stand down and sign over everything. Completely. His face twisted in shock. You're crazy. I shrugged. Then let the banks continue what I started. Without my financial support, the banks would close in. His empire would crumble. His staff would dissolve. His investors would withdraw. Within months, he'd have nothing. You wouldn't. I met his stare. I would. And I am. Tension filled the silence. His breath was short, shallow. His mind raced. After what felt like an eternity, he realized he had no leverage, no way out. In a voice barely above a whisper, he finally said, I'll sign. I nodded. Wise choice. I called my lawyer. Have the paperwork ready by 6 p.m. By morning, everything was in motion. By sunset, my father-in-law would be nothing more than a footnote in his own empire. His name, his authority, his legacy absorbed. Men like him fear more than just losing wealth. They fear losing power, respect. And that was exactly what was happening. My lawyer ensured the news spread the moment the paperwork was signed. Investors, business associates, local media. It wasn't framed as a scandal. That would have been too simple. It was a bold, well-planned declaration of new leadership. By the next morning, the headlines were clear. Titan falls, the end of an era. A company takeover. A deceived husband's ascent to power. I could picture his face when he read those words. The slow disintegration of his ego. The realization that his name was being erased. He was no longer the self-made entrepreneur who commanded respect. He was the fool who had underestimated the wrong man. At 8:30 a.m., my assistant knocked hesitantly on my door. Sir, you have a guest. I didn't need to ask who. Send her in. The door slid open. I didn't look up. I already knew my ex-wife stood there, immaculately dressed as always. But something had changed. That effortless confidence she once exuded? Gone. She hesitated at the threshold, unsure. Perhaps for the first time, she wasn't certain of her place. You did this, she muttered. I finally leaned back in my chair, locking eyes with her. Did I? Her jaw clenched. She swallowed. She was afraid, not of me, but of the consequences of her choices. You don't have to continue this, she pleaded. I tapped my fingers against the desk. I haven't even started. She shifted uneasily. So what happens next? I watched her closely, then smiled. That depends. She furrowed her brows. On what? I stood, walking toward the window, looking out over the city. On what you thought would happen. Her voice faltered. I made a mistake. I turned to her. No. Her fingers curled into fists. You made a decision. Her breath hitched. Is there any way to fix this? I let the question hang between us. I let her sit in the silence. Then finally I smirked. No. Her shoulders slumped. The final strand of hope unraveled. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. Without another word, she turned and walked away. But I knew this wasn't over. She wasn't the last one who would come crawling back. Regret doesn't fade. It festers. And by mid-morning, her father would be next. I didn't have to wait long. My assistant knocked again. I didn't even need to ask. Let him in.